Isaac Goff Mitchell. I'm a former communications intern and now communications specialist with Choices Coordinated Care Solutions. And I'm here with an old friend of mine, Luke. Luke, can you introduce yourself and just say a little bit about what it is you do?
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. I am Luke Labus. I am currently serving as the ADA coordinator for the city of Indianapolis and Mayor Joe Hogshead's top advisor and director of disability services for the entire city of Indianapolis. When we're talking about developing more equitable policies and services for our communities and for our country and serving the entire population and breaking down those barriers. When these policies are being created, people with disabilities need to be in the room and have their voices being heard in these discussions when policies and or systems and programs and services are being developed. And in the context of, you'll find many employers and organizations, they'll talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you never hear about discussions around disability and access within that discussion in the mainstream. And the thing about disability that people don't often think about, it's the largest minority group in the country. It is roughly 1 in 4 people in the country. So that's 25% of our population. And when we're talking about creating more equitable services and or accessible infrastructure, you know, disability is a group that you can join at any time. In my case, I was born with my disability, but you can acquire a disability tomorrow, or you can age into a disability if you live long enough. So when we talk about access, equity, and inclusion within the realm of diversity and civil rights, we need to be incorporating disability. The Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964 did not address people with disabilities as a protected class. So it was still legal to discriminate against people with disabilities after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. It wasn't until 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, that people with disabilities became a protected class, and we said to society, you can no longer discriminate against people with disabilities. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is the civil rights legislation that protects people with disabilities. And one of the interesting things, when you compare the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to the ADA passage in 1990, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, that immediately said discrimination was illegal the day it was signed, meaning the law went into immediate effect. It took 2 years for the ADA regulations to take effect after it was passed, from an infrastructure standpoint, from a design standpoint. So they still gave society kind of a 2-year lead period until the ADA legislation actually was enforceable, to give time to employers and organizations to get up to speed. I always love talking about this subject because, you know, we live in a society currently that is all about embracing diversity, and a lot of these conversations we have overlap and intersect with disability. And so from the context of diversity, it comes down to embracing your disability and what makes you different as an asset. And from an employer perspective as well, it's important that when you have or are considering, employees with disabilities and bringing them into your workforce, you look at the opportunity. There are many stereotypes and myths about people with disabilities not being as educated or taking longer to do work, meaning less productivity, or hiring an individual with a disability, they'll be sick, or as you mentioned earlier, medically fragile, so they'll miss more work. They'll be out more frequently, leading to less productivity. Providing accommodations, that's going to be too costly. What happens if I have to fire them? Will they file a discrimination lawsuit? So I won't even consider hiring them in the first place because I don't want to deal with a legal mess. And so research actually shows that when you bring on people with disabilities, your profit margins grow, and it increases company morale, it increases productivity. And from the standpoint of accommodations, over 90% of accommodations can be provided for under $200. And the thing about accommodations is they're one-time expenses, many of them. So you pay for a technology device to make something accessible, it's a one-time expense. And then if that employee is there year over year, month over month, it'll eventually pay for itself, and it allows the employee to be more productive. So they're getting more work done because of the accommodation that they've been provided. And so, when we talk about diversifying workforce, because many employers are looking to make a commitment towards diversity, disability is within that. And there are numerous stereotypes and perceptions that are just entirely inaccurate. If you look at things as providing accommodations to all employees that increase productivity and increase accessibility, I often say what's accessible for people with disabilities is best for everyone. It's best practice. The example you just gave about an office chair, everybody has one. You may not use it all day because some people have switched to standing desks periodically, but it's there, because imagine if you had to stand all day, you would be less productive. And people like me, wheelchair users, we don't require office chairs, so you're saving money in that context. But we may require other technology, a computer mouse, or things that every employee uses, a parking space, parking within a building, for example. That is coveted, but the mainstream and employers don't look at those as accommodations. They look at them as employee benefits, and they look at disability accommodations as accommodations and or lessening the expectations in many cases for the employee, when really it's about leveling the playing field and allowing for a chance for them to be as equally as productive as their peers. I would tell you, broadly speaking, the disability community is very self-aware and notices the little details, and they pay attention to when organizations do things right, and they're noticed, and they want to support those organizations. I will tell you, when I travel to cities or places, I often look at a city website and see if they have something on their website as it relates to accessibility. You know, to figure out not only if they're, you know, certain things are accessible, but what kind of services do they provide to people with disabilities. In the realm of places of employment, what they can do to better serve customers or individuals within the disability community from a communication standpoint. When you look at social media outreach or posts for members of the blind community, for example, they use assistive technology to read text. So whenever you put images within posts, to include image descriptions within your social media posts, because it doesn't do any good for a blind person to read a photo on a social media post. So for example, you would put a post with a picture with a black background that says call 1-800-5482, for example, to reach so-and-so to get connected to said program. There should be a blurb on the social media post that says image description, and it's only text. That way it allows the blind individual to use their software, and it conveys what is indicated in the picture in detail. And I would also encourage, whenever an organization is doing a public meeting, whether virtual or in person, you know, if there are members within the disability community that you know are attending, or even not, whether you're reading off of a PowerPoint presentation, I can't tell you how many times someone has said, I don't need to read that, you can read it for yourself. Not if you're blind, you can't. So yes, you need to read what's on the slide to convey that information to that individual. So whether it's charts, whether it's bullet points, I mean, we need to be providing and delivering information, and not to just assume, oh, everyone can read that, I'm not going to read it to you, because, you know, who does that? Well, that's what's most accessible, and, you know, things that can be done to be accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing community, to be accessible to those who are blind or have low vision. So from a communication and dissemination of information standpoint, there are basic things that can be done from an outreach standpoint. And again, those things are noticed by the disability community, and they'll want to support places of business that go those extra steps. And again, simple things like that don't cost money. It's just a little bit of effort and a little bit of notice to say, okay, we're going to do this to make this more accessible.